I got to be close to you guys. All right. And by the way, I just want to say a quick, recognition. My two sons, Tamara and Weir. So give them hello. 14 years in Barcelona. So they know Catalan, they know Spanish. The only words I know are vino tinto, which is my rescue Spanish, and baños, so I can order my wine and then get rid of it. So that's, hey, real quick, what are the two things that all unicorns have in common? Talk among yourself. What is it that since you brought up unicorns, what do all unicorns, what did they figure out, and what's part of their business model that a lot of us are missing? That if you can apply these two things, you're going to grow faster. Go, talk among yourselves. All right, so what's unique about unicorns? Anyone? But what allows them to grow so fast? Maybe. He said capital, scalable processes, maybe. By the way, maybe means no. I'm just trying to be friendly. Yeah, they may have all those things, but you probably do as well. But there's two things that are, well, by the way, it's interesting with luck. So we're going to look at people, strategy, execution, and cash. Which one of those four is most important? People, strategy, execution, or cash? How many say people? How many say strategy? Wow. Execution and cash. Well, that's just because, lots of cash, right? Right. So you know the firm IDEO. They're out of California. They've launched 100 companies, have funded 100 companies. They studied of the ones that won big and lost. They looked at people, strategy, execution, and cash. And what they found is, first, all four mattered equally. If you're missing any one of those four, then it's not going to be successful. But they found one that matters more than the four. And I had to go back and edit my book based on that research. What do you think matters more than people, strategy, execution, and cash? Market timing, exactly. And that's where luck comes around. I mean, the market either makes you look smart or makes you look stupid. Like, how many of you have friends who you know are more stupido than you, yet have gotten stinking rich, right? I mean, it's like, how did that dumb person do so well? Versus, you're wicked smart, but you still haven't made it. And a big part of it is catching the wave. The market makes you look smarter. So IDEO had funded a company that should have been YouTube. The problem is they were too early. We didn't have the bandwidth. We didn't have the easy devices to take the photos, to edit them, to get it launched up onto sites. And YouTube came along, and they nailed the timing. So first of all, you've got to make sure that you've nailed the timing. And if you've missed the wave, go find another wave. And that's going to be a lot easier. So there is a big part of it that's luck, but you can see that if you're aware of the market. But that's any business. What's it take, though, to really scale? And there's two things that we've noticed. First, all the unicorns don't supply anything. They don't supply anything. What they do, and we all talked about supply chain management over the last 50 years, they are all focused on demand. They know more about the customer than anybody else. They're all demand generation engines. Their job is to generate demand for all kinds of people that supply stuff. So, Airbnb, they don't own any homes. They don't pay any insurance. They don't have to clean any places. What they do, though, is what? Drive demand to people who own those homes. Lyft and Uber, they don't own any cars. They don't have any drivers. They don't have to pay any insurance. They have to do any maintenance. But what they do is what? They figure out where people need to go, and they drive that demand to others. Amazon, They really don't make anything. They do have AWS, but what they do is they've got the algorithms that understand what it is that we're looking for, and they drive demand to, for instance, my book. And we pay lots of money and we pray that they make those choices. What is interesting is ultimately AI is going to, and once we perfect the AI assistant, that AI assistant is going to go out and what? Find the products, find the services, find the cars, and all of that we need. And that is going to be the single largest disruptor in the history of Amazon, Google, and everybody else. So you, first of all, the job of your app, your software, your business is to first and foremost know more about the market and the customer and what they were doing just before and what they're going to do after, so that you can then drive demand. So what must Cinna, whatever that game's called, what must it really be doing? Through its questions, if it's clever and all kinds of things, figuring out and then identifying, all right, what's this person likely going to want or need next? And then I'm going to drive that demand to people who are willing to pay the most money for it. So you want to be in the demand-based business. What's the second thing that all unicorns have in common? What do they use that demand knowledge to do? Well, sell, but it's uniquely a sell how? What's the thing they're able to vary? Price. See, all the unicorns use demand-based pricing, where everybody they're competing with has a fixed price. So if I want to take a taxi, I'm paying so much for 1/8 of a kilometer. If I take Uber or Lyft, what is their price based on? Demand. Right now on airlines, the big thing airlines finally figured out is, look, Carol and I took the exact same flight, same route, roughly same seat, but everybody on that airplane, what? Paid a different price based on, did I want it sooner or later? Where on the plane? Do I want to, get the premier check-in? Do I want to go to the lounge? There's all kinds of variables. Amazon, my book has a price, but on Amazon, that price is changing by the minute based on the demand at any one time. Restaurants, that was the real gift that was given to restaurants in the pandemic. What was the gift pandemic gave restaurants? The QR code for a menu. Now, some startups have jumped into that, and what are they allowing restaurants to do now that you have a digital menu? Literally have dynamic pricing. There's an HBR article on it that you can look up, because the big issue with the restaurant is you've got inventory, and what's the life of that inventory? Very short, right? And you've got an issue if you run out of the popular menu items, that's lost revenue. If you end up having food left over, that is a loss. So what can they do dynamically now? Vary the price by the minute. So if all of a sudden I see I'm selling something very popular, why don't I raise the price so I can slow down demand and make sure we don't run out, and the people who really want it will pay for it. And if I have something that's not selling, what do? Lower the price. Who figured that out early on was Michael Dell. Michael was brilliant. He's a 19-year-old, $1,000. Today the company was about $100 billion. But the thing he learned early on is you've got to sell what you have and not sell what you don't have if you're going to be a demand generation engine. And so Michael would literally vary price real time when it was hard to do this, so that they could create consistent throughput, not only through their factories, but their suppliers' factories. And because he was able to match demand with supply perfectly, varying price, he became the preferred manufacturer for those suppliers, which meant he got a much better deal. And so your ability to be able to vary price, and if you don't have a variable pricing model within whatever is your business model, you're leaving about half the valuation of your business on the table. And that's why it's so critical that you understand that pricing side of the business. By the way, we're also having some fun psychologically. So one of the companies that Carol's coaching, and we've got 257 now coaches. Whoops, I keep moving forward, don't I? I'm telling you, let's untape that and we'll move it right there and then I'll be fine. Because I love the crowd here, is they've got a language company that literally has doubled their revenue in the last 12 months from 25 million to 50 million. They'll go to 100 million. And things like this. They have an inside sales organization. People call in. They've realized in their business that we've got to still have some customer, inside dynamics. Just changing the first question that they ask somebody who's called in to see if they want to sign up for a 2-year subscription, which is a nice recurring revenue model for their business. By just changing that opening question, their revenue all of a sudden overnight took off. So one of the things you've got to realize is that you're selling to people. And guess what we've learned about people? They are not logical. They are psychological. And so one of the most important things for you to understand if you're going to scale your business is the psychology of people. And so I want to recommend a book. I think it's probably one of the 2 most important that all startups and all entrepreneurs read. And it's by the godfather of influence, a guy named Dr. Robert Cialdini. Because at the end of the day, our job as entrepreneurs is to influence other people to invest in us, to work for us, to be on our board, and ultimately to buy our products and services. And so his book is called Influence. And he updated it last year. There were 6 principles. He found a 7th. And then I want you to also read his book, Persuasion. And you will see that even the background that you choose for your website, where people might go, or your app, can dramatically drive whether people decide to buy from you or not, and what features they might choose that you're offering. And so understanding deeply the psychology of people becomes critical as you begin to scale. So with that, I want to share 4 ideas that are going to drive valuation. And I want to use an example of a early client of ours, Dave Rogenmoser. Dave had founded a couple other companies, really struggled kind of scaling them up, got them sold, and he decided to launch a 3rd company, Austin, Texas, and he wanted to do it much further faster. He wanted to create a unicorn very quick. By the way, you know that company today as Jasper. Any of you guys familiar with Jasper? They just raised $125 million at a $1.5 billion valuation, and they launched his company just a few years ago. But he launched it first in another space, and that's okay. You might, most importantly, have to pivot very quickly once you figured out, hey, this isn't working. Let's take our capabilities and pivot to something that is. And so he launched initially a company called Proof, which is we're going to provide social proof on people's websites so that you can validate that they really have this many likes, that this is what people prefer. You know what? I'm going to back up for a second. There is a 3rd thing all the unicorns have in common because it feeds into what he's doing now. What's the 3rd thing? So they drive demand, which they can use to vary price. Here's the 3rd thing. They have built all of their business models on not figuring out how just to get the right people on the bus, but how do we get the most people working for our venture for free? So, Facebook. What's the value of Facebook tied to? Well, Meta now. Meta. What's the value of Meta tied to? Users. How many do they have? Just over 3 billion. How many active in any one day? 2 billion. Who put up all those pages? Who updates all those pages that really drives their value? The users. What do they pay the users to do this? Look, if you have 2 billion volunteers working for you every hour, probably working harder for Meta than they are the company where they're working for you. Well, that is a really good business model. What really is the value of Amazon? Why is it right now the #1 search engine for products? It surpassed Google, which was a big threat to Google's business model. Why do people go to Amazon to check out a product? Even if they know the manufacturer, you go directly to the website. It's the reviews. And look, when I'm trying to sort out which cable I want, for a certain device, I go to Amazon, and what am I really looking closely at? Those reviews, and are there any negatives that I ought to be aware of that the tribe, you, are letting me know about? What has Amazon paid for all of those reviews? That content? Zero. Oh, they might give you you're a power reviewer, you get multiple stars, but that's a really good business model. Google, ultimately, what is Google's business? Search. How do they decide what to give you as an answer? They've tapped into the 3.8 billion people that are searching on a daily basis and amalgamating all of that data and information to give you an answer in nanoseconds. What did they just pay for all of that? Zero. So if you can figure out in your business model how to get 100,000, 1 million, or 1 billion people to feed your business model. So that was the single most important argument in the history of Apple. And if the guy making the argument was Steve Jobs had lost, Apple would not be the most valuable company today. Because Steve Jobs' whole business model was based on Hotel California. You can check in, but you can never leave. He created this closed ecosystem, which means that you have to pay $1 gazillion for a phone or any device that you want as part of the Apple ecosystem. But that's hardware. And because it was a closed ecosystem, Steve Jobs was adamant he wanted nobody outside of Apple to write any software that would run on his devices. And a very smart guy inside Apple said, look, Steve, we need to open up our platform for other people to create apps for our devices. And what do you think Steve Jobs' response was? Fuck you. Right. I mean, that's a technical term. I hope it translates. And it was the biggest F you, no F you, no F you, no F you argument in the history of Apple. And thank goodness this one guy inside Apple said, Steve, we have to do this. And Steve goes, F you, but do it. And what did that do? That opened up their devices to millions of people. And what does, by the way, Apple pay all those people to write all of those apps and music and everything that powers their devices? What do they pay them? Zero. Well, of course, they charge for that right to do it. Right? Now, they take a piece of that, and people ultimately make money off of their platforms, like people make money off the Amazon platforms and all of that. So, it's not that nefarious, but that is what allowed Apple's market cap to be the largest in history by figuring out as part of their business model, a hardware manufacturer, how we're going to get millions of people for free to somehow or another power our business model. Take a moment and talk with each other. Are you doing that? If you are, share how you're doing it. How might you get more of the crowd involved? Go, see what you come up with. So there's a lot of functions that are needed to scale. Operations and sales and accounting and IT and HR and all that. Which one, though, is most critical to scaling? HR, maybe. Oh, yeah, that's actually a good thought. But in this case, there is one. And the research is clear. Ed Roberts, our senior fellow at MIT, studied high-tech, fast-growth companies, found among, and his book is still a classic, around how you scale a technology firm and he looked at all these factors, and this function is absolutely the most critical, especially in the early time, but forever. Which one is it, really? What? Close. It's related to sales. Which one? Marketing. And a lot of folks don't realize that when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, even though his title was CEO, the only function he chaired was marketing. And it was a 3-hour meeting every Wednesday afternoon. And what Ed Roberts' research found is, as long as, particularly in the startup team and early on, there is single person just laser focused on marketing, separate from everybody else, the company scaled much further faster. So Steve understood that. And so way pre-product, he said, all right, I'm going to bring in the smartest marketing guru in the world. He's the one that went on to advise Apple, Intel, Genentech, almost every major company in Silicon Valley. By the way, Jeffrey Moore worked for him and became one of the marketing gurus. 𝗕𝗁 worked for him. And it was a guy named Regis McKenna. And what Regis understood back then, and we know today, who are what do we say about the people who make the most money on the internet? They are what? Influence marketers. There's that word influence again, right? And so Regis wrote a book called Relationship Marketing. And so I called him in 1983. I was a student at Wichita State University. I was young, dumb, and broke, as the song goes. And I want to build the world's largest entrepreneur organization. And I had read that Regis McKenna had helped Steve Jobs get to, by the way, just for fun, 1985, when Steve was fired from Apple, he was 29 years old. Bill Gates was 29 years old. One of the early things I did was identify the top 100 young entrepreneurs under the age of 30, got the media to cover it and all of that. Who was bigger? By the way, they're both 29. Who was bigger at the time, Microsoft or Apple? Microsoft. By how much? Give me the rough 5 times. Give me rough revenue. They're 29 years old. This is back in the 80s where money was real money, not fake money today. Roughly, what were their revenues? 50 million, 100 million, 200 million. What do you think? 5 million. Okay. So in my top 100 list, number 9 on the list was Michael Dell. Michael was 20 years old and had done 19 million. So that was number 9. Number 4 on the list was Bill Gates. And Bill did 256 million. That was a lot for a 29-year-old. But who was number 1? Steve Jobs. 1.9 billion. Not valuation. 1.9 billion in revenue. He was 8 times bigger than Bill Gates. That's why Bill Gates would always come down and see Steve. Steve never had to go up to Redmond to see Bill. And Bill always lived in the shadow of Steve Jobs because Steve was the original young entrepreneur. And he is the sole reason I launched the Young Entrepreneurs Organization. So anyway, I called up Regis McKenna. I said, look, you helped Steve get above $1 billion. Would you help me? And that is one of the most important things you need to learn as an entrepreneur, is to ask for help. And to ask for help from the biggest, most successful people you can find to talk to you. And the bigger, the faster you'll scale. And I said, look, you've got to have a good elevator pitch. I said, I want to build the world's largest, none of this minor stuff. I want to build an entrepreneurship group in Wichita, Kansas. No, I want to build the world's largest entrepreneur organization for people like Steve Jobs. That got Regis' attention. And he said, all right, I'll help you. I was his only free client he ever had. It was $80,000 for the first meeting, let alone what he would charge. But he said he'll do it for free. Now, I'm a nonprofit, So he said, all right, I'm going to teach you what I taught Steve. And I'm like, all right. And he sends me the manual this thick. If I still had it and turned it into an NFT, I wouldn't be standing here. All right. I would be down in the Dominican Republic, hanging out on the beach, or Canary Islands or some other place. And then he said, you've got to do two things. First, he puts his finger up. I'm like, what is that? He said, you have to set aside 1 hour a week for marketing. But it's just me. Well, just have a meeting with yourself. But you need to set aside 1 hour for marketing. It's been 10 to 11 a.m. every year of my life, every day, every week of my life since 1983. Still is today. Cameron, who works with me on marketing, 10:08 Eastern Standard Time on Monday. And then he asked me a question that Bill Gates considered the best question he was ever asked. It was the question that Steve Jobs used every stage of scaling up Apple. And that question is, what are the top 25 influencers, relationships that you need to bolt on to your vision if you want to scale it? And the bigger the names, the faster you will scale. So again, I'm young, dumb, and broke, 1983. I write down President Ronald Reagan. I'm going to get the President of the United States to be the first president to ever use the word entrepreneur. No other president had ever used it. By the way, I did and got invited to the White House. I then put Steve Jobs. I need Steve involved in this. I need Michael Dell. There were two major publications, Inc. magazine, still popular today, Venture magazine. Those were my top 5, and I added 20 more. And then all we did as a student at Wichita State is I spent an hour every week figuring out how I was going to get those 25 to support my vision. 36 months later, we were global. It was an idea in 83. 86, I'm global. I lead the first delegation of young entrepreneurs to mainland China. We're talking about 3 years before Tiananmen Square. I go to Japan. I meet with the Donald Trump of Japan, Soji Kanazawa, get us launched there. I host the first public speech Steve Jobs ever gave after being fired from Apple. I've got 1,200 of you from around the world sitting there with Steve Jobs. Who do I have sitting next to him? Michael Dell, Mark Cuban, Kevin Harrington, Neil Balter. These would all be, very well-known names still today in the entrepreneurial world. I've got Inc. and Venture magazine sitting in the audience writing up articles. And I've got President Ronald Reagan agreeing to fly in to do the welcome to the evening. Now, we got diverted by a war, yes. All right, so we are global in 36 months. So when Steve Jobs needed to launch iTunes, the first thing he did is took a piece of paper out, made a list of the 25 most powerful people in music distribution. Nobody would return his phone call. The egos in the music industry, you couldn't fit between here and Mars. And so all you do is you find the person who will get you to them. It was Don Henley, the drummer for the Eagles. He invited Don over. He said, Don, do you know anybody on the list? He goes, I know that guy. By the way, number 1 on the list was Sam Bronfman. Cameron dated his daughter when Sam was living here in Barcelona. 24 months later, Steve Jobs, quoted an article by Sam Bronfman, said, we don't know how this young kid who makes hardware has become the king of music distribution. So I want to go back to Dave Rogan-Mosier. Dave is sitting there on the weekend. He and his 2 partners decide they're going to launch what today is called Jasper at $1.5 billion valuation. And he said, all right, I'm going to do what Verne said. Took a piece of paper out and made a list of the top 50 influencers in the industry. He didn't know any of them. He couldn't get to any of them. So what he did is he found one person who knew most of them. And he gave that person 1% of his company. And by the way, 1% today of 1.5 billion, that's a pretty good deal. At the time, it was worth 0. But that guy introduced him to 30 on the list within the first month. The second month, those 30 introduced him to the next 18. And in 2 months, he had 48 of the most important people in the segment of the industry he was going after talking about his company. And he is a year from MVP, from having any kind of a product. In fact, he was joking how his friends would like text him, Dave, everybody's talking about you. And that's how industries are. All you have to do is get a few people talking about you, and what happens? The right people, and all of a sudden, everybody is talking about you. So that's your first step. If you haven't done it, I want you to make the list of the biggest names that you can think of that if you could add their brand and their name and get them talking about you, that will make you soar. When I launched then YEO, I wanted to launch an executive program. If I'd called it the YEO whatever, nobody would have showed up. But I bolted on the MIT brand and Inc. magazine brand. In our first course, we had 800 apply for the 48 seats that I had. And those 800, many of them were the initial members who went out and formed the chapters that got this organization going. And so and your brand. Today, my brand is bolted on to Harvard, which is slightly better than MIT brand. And that's opening up all kinds of opportunities around the globe. So that's number one. Make the list and work it. Number two, all brand is then in influencing people to buy from you is owning a word or two in the minds of the market. The single most important strategy question. Each of these is anchored by a question. Most important strategy question is job to be done. What job are you really going to do for me? And so, what job does Google do for us? In a word. In a word. Simpler. Search, right? And by the way, Google's tried to do all kinds of other things. They stuck it under a new brand called Alphabet. And 2 years later, you know what they conceded? $2 trillion of our value comes from search. The next trillion will come from search, right? I wish upon you this problem every day. When Cameron was born, my oldest, I wanted a new car. Now, all cars' jobs to get you from point A to point B, but being a new father with your first baby, I needed a car that would do it what? The safest. What did I buy? A Volvo. There was no question. Have you guys noticed in the last few weeks, Volvo's been coming out with all kinds of ads saying, hey, we may not be the prettiest, the sexiest, the fastest, the most electric, but we are what? The safest. That's the job to be done. And we know this, the riches are in the niches. The biggest mistake you make is you try to go after too big of a market and too wide of a market. So, last question, then I'll hit execution and cash and we're done. So I know Nate, one of the co-founders of Airbnb, and Brian Chesky being the other one, and I always forget the third guy. Everybody forgets the third guy. You don't want to be the third guy. All right. and so they're struggling. They took literally 5 years and had no revenue. So they talked their way into Y Combinator. Paul Graham turned them down the first time. But they had this clever couple boxes of like O's, Obama O's and something else. And as they were leaving the meeting with Paul Graham, they said, well, here's a couple of our cereal boxes. Paul recognized that as what? Marketing. Paul was smart enough to realize, wait a second, these are techies who have some sense of marketing. So they said, all right, get back in here. They go another year. They can't make any money. So finally, Paul walked in and asked this key question. Where are your best customers? And what do you think they said? Where are your best customers located? They said everywhere. No. Their attitude is everyone's going to be our customer. Everyone's going to want this. And so Paul goes, wait, you're not understanding. Right now, where do you have the most real customers? They're a Silicon Valley company. They said New York City. We have 20 beds. That's it. You've been in business for 6 years. You got 20 beds in New York, and that's your biggest city. So guess what Paul told them to do? Move to New York. If you want to win wars and you want to win markets, in a word, the key is first-hand intel. If things are not working, you go live with your customer. You go move in with them. You go find out. That's the essence of lean startup. You go be side by side with them. So they moved in with their customers, which you could at Airbnb, and they found it. There were two stupid things happening for just really bad photos and bad descriptions. They had professional photos made. They made better descriptions. And then here was the key. They stayed in New York. They focused in New York until they got from 20 to 200 beds. And then they had the critical mass. People were coming in from London and from Paris saying, this is great. I would like to do this in my city. And then it took off. So you always have to make it local. Whether it's a narrow industry segment, whether it's a geography, whatever it is, the biggest mistake you make is you go big too early and you don't secure your base close enough that you can continue to iterate with them. And what that means is you've got to be clear what is the word or two you want to own in the minds of the market. Real quick, turn to somebody. What word or two do you own? By the way, how do you know if you own it? You Google it. And Google will tell you whether or not you are getting close to getting it done. Go real quick. What's your word or two? Job of your product or service in the market. Oh, you guys don't have a clue, so you need to work on that. Come back. I only have like 3 minutes left. By the way, just to give another example, what company comes to mind when I say deliver pizza? Domino's. Now, Pizza Hut has been second in some places, but all they did was say, if you want pizza delivered, by the way, their core customer, college kids who wanted their faces fed fast, that was a job to be done. We'll do it 30 minutes or less or free. That put $4 billion in Tom Monahan's pocket. And that's not a high-tech company. But it was very clear the job to be done. And that's what you've got to be crystal clear to figure out. So when Dave Rogenmoser launched Proof, he said, all right, what we want to do is really up the WX, the web experience that people have. And that's where they focus first. Now, Jasper's thing is about AI-generated marketing content. And they're in a race with ChatGPT on that. But their position is that their algorithms are learning more cleverly about you specifically faster than ChatGPT. And that's the race that they're in. But they're very clear, the space, job to be done. That's strategy. Now you got execution. What is the most important execution question? And that is, and it's the single most important book ever written in business. If you can only read one book, you throw mine off the boat and you get this book. And it's called The Gold by this Israeli named Eli Goldratt. And it's a parable. Anyone read The Gold? We got a couple. It should be like absolute required reading, because here's the key. You all have limited time and resources. Steve Jobs had a lot less time than he thought. For you to spend any of your resources, time, money, whatever, any place but the constraint. What he taught us was this very simple idea, theory of constraints. It's not problems. Often the constraint is your biggest opportunity. And if you can ultimately discover the constraint in your industry and you solve it, you create the proverbial moat around the business. And now the competition cannot even get close to you. And that's what you want to do. And so at any one moment, what do you wake up today and focus on? The constraint today. It could be between your ears, your thinking. It could be within your business model. But ultimately, you want to discover what is the constraint in the industry. And if you fix it, which is what all of you should be in the business of doing, then you're going to win and win big. And so Dave's sitting there. And by the way, and it doesn't have to be major. I remember as they were scaling up, they had hit 25,000 MRR, monthly recurring revenue. And he said, look, we know right now in terms of valuations, if you can get above $500,000, then all of a sudden, now it's $1 million, but if you get above $500,000, then we could go out and get our first significant round. So he said, all right, our focus for the quarter is to get us to 45,000 ARR. Times 12, we're going to be right at about the $500,000 we need to. And what he then did is he put in a cowbell. And every time they hit 1,000, they would ring the bell and celebrate it so that you could piece together little successes. And that's what you have to do for teams. Any of you guys play Candy Crush or any video games? What's the key to video games? Constantly winning, constantly succeeding, constantly reaching different levels, as opposed to one. You as leaders have got to create a video game atmosphere within your own organization. Let me said this, if we hit 45,000, I'm going to buy the company a Tesla. That was back when that was cool. And we'll have it to kind of cruise around in Austin, Texas. And they exceeded it. That next 90 days, they took it from 25,000 to 55,000 MRR. And that got them moving in the next direction. So that's execution. What is your immediate constraint? If we had time, I'd ask you to share that with each other. Now, cash, your fourth decision. What's the cheapest money you can get? From the bank, maybe. Your customer. So one of our early clients is Atlassian. You guys know Atlassian? And when Scott and Mike launched the company, their second year in business, 24 months in, they came to my workshop in Sydney, Australia. Today, market cap of about $35 billion. But what's neat is Mike and Scott still own 72% of the company, right? They didn't give it all away. Same with 𝗕𝗰𝗽𝗀. So how did Dave get started? Well, he had the influencers talking about him. Now he's got buzz in the industry a year before he's got product. He's got slideware, what we call slideware. And so he hosts a webinar. And about 200 potential customers show up to the webinar. He shows the slides of what product is we're looking at building and should have an MVP in a year. And then he said this, anyone who's willing to prepay a year in advance, you will get 50% discount on whatever we make the rest of your company's life. And 17 companies signed up and paid him after that webinar, which was the funding that he needed for that first year. The ownership that Dave still has, when you're able to raise, $125 million at a $1.5 billion valuation, you're only giving 8% of the company up at that side, at that point along the way. And so what you want to do is figure out, as Scott Fuqua and Mike did, as 𝗕𝗰𝗽𝗀 did, as did Hester, who we interviewed on Monday. She created a technology that creates games that provide people mental agility. She's focused on folks with Alzheimer's and other kind of aging mental diseases, kids with autism, and the rest. She did the same. She bootstrapped the company to 10 million euros in revenue. And the first thing she did is, hey, any customer willing to buy our set of games, she only gave a 5% discount for the rest. And she had enough funder at that point that she could then go out, and she was making hardware as well as the software to get them funded. Only then did they take in around $6 million, and they're off to the races. 14 countries, 100+ games, scaling significantly. So there's the 4. 1, whoever has the biggest and best influencer list wins. Number 2, it's about owning a word or two in the minds of enough people in the market to begin to get some kind of momentum. But you want to start local, concentrate. That's the quickest way for you to get momentum. Number 3, the decision you make every moment is to go where the constraint is, not the problem, the constraint in the business today, this quarter, this year. And then number 4, as quick as you can get customers to fund you. That is the best, cheapest money you can get, and it validates that you actually have something that the market wants. So with that, hopefully there's some ideas to help you guys. Thank you so much.
But first of all, I want to thank you.
You're welcome.
And guys, this is real value you are getting here at 𝗕𝗰𝗽𝗽.
This is real value you're getting at the 𝗕𝗰𝗽𝗽 right here, right?
Safety.
We're going to French kiss here shortly, but just, he's Cuban. You do that kind of thing.
Thank you for being our partner.
Yes.
Thank you for being here. And this is the first time I will thank you for things you have done for us in the past. We know about 15 years each other. So we became friends.
Yes.
And in 2 conversations with you, very short conversations, you gave me answers that changed my life, the life of my company.
Good.
You don't remember that, but I will remind you now. One was regarding our product positioning.
Yeah.
It was 𝗕𝗰𝗽𝗃 Technologies.
Yep.
We were having lunch.
Yep.
And I asked you a question, and you say, okay, focus in one use case, not many use cases. I was providing many use cases to the market.
Yeah.
And you said, just choose one. And I said, well, why? Why and which one? And you said to me, case management. Because from what I explained to you, you catch the idea and you say, you have to focus on case management. So we focus our company on automating case management, which we were already doing that.
That's your 2
without that focus.
You owned.
That really changed our life. We started selling massively. Prior, we were struggling with sales. So just by focusing in one use case, and you gave us that.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And the second time was we were in a situation with our venture capitalist.
Yeah.
And you gave me a couple of insights and a phrase that made me think a lot about that. So we finally solved that situation with a management buyout.
Awesome.
So we have done more things together, but I wanted to bring those 2 values here and ask you, because you have given us a lot of value here. I consider you a mentor because of that and other things as well.
Lover. No, just kidding. we keep that quiet.
Wine lover.
Exactly. It's like one of many lovers. All right.
My wife is there, by the way.
I'm just kidding.
So, what is the role you place to a mentor for an entrepreneur?
What role do I play as a mentor?
No.
What role should a mentor play?
Yes. Do you recommend any of those guys here to have a mentor? So you have given them value.
Yeah.
But do you consider that having a mentor is something important, is key?
Yeah. And in fact, it really ties back to the opening thing I said. The more brains you can get engaged in your business, the faster you're going to scale. So you need a mentor, which is different than advisors, which are different than a coach. And understanding the difference between those three is critical. So Steve Jobs, Eric, all of those guys had a coach. Bill Campbell was the famous coach who was right there near Steve's side, even as he passed this earth. A coach's job, as we have, is to be willing to be fired every day. There's no professional athlete who doesn't have a coach, right? And their job is to say, look, if you're not going to be willing to perform and do as we say, then I'm out of here. I'll find somebody who is. So that's a coach. A mentor has a different mindset. A mentor are the folks generally who care about you personally and want to just see you succeed. And their job really is to motivate you, to keep you encouraged. And, coaches do that too, but sometimes the coach can be quite discouraging by telling you the brutal fact. The mentor's job is really there to keep pushing you along and serve as a role model moving forward. And then advisors should have a very narrow, deep specialty in something that you need to figure out. If there's a component of yours that is AI, you need to have the smartest advisor you can in the AI field, in the marketing field. So Regis McKenna was not a mentor of Steve Jobs, though he did some mentoring. He wasn't a coach of Steve Jobs. He was the marketing advisor to Steve Jobs. So do you see the difference between those three? You want them all.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So any other questions? We'll take two more, please.
Anything that you would change and to start any mistake you would rather not take by the point you start now?
Yes, we talked about it at lunch. I never would have made EO nonprofit. I should have made it for profit, and again, I wouldn't be standing here singing for my supper kind of thing. Seriously, it was a mistake. What else? Oh, and you know what? To think even bigger. Yeah, it is so much easier to raise money, get attention. If I said, again, I want to build the largest entrepreneur organization in Kansas or Wichita State or the United States versus the world, I wouldn't have got the attention. And so being able to put out a big, big goal attracts much bigger attention. And so you need to always think massive. Yes. But you've got to start local. We started at Wichita State, our first chapter. Then I went where the market was. So I focused on Boston. Wichita State's not an exciting place where most of the students that are building companies, either Stanford or MIT, Harvard, all those schools, 250,000 students in Boston. I'm like, I'm not stupid. So our first student event was at MIT, and I'd got a meeting in the basement of this Chinese restaurant at Harvard Square with the heads of the entrepreneur programs at Harvard, at MIT, Babson, Dartmouth, Colby. They were all right there. And then all I did was say, I called Stanford up, Ann Gullickson, and said, Ann, Harvard's going to be there. And I told Harvard, Stanford's going to be there. Once I had Harvard and Stanford saying they're going to be there, everyone else showed up at MIT, even though I was from Wichita State University. So Boston was my anchor. And that's where I built it first. And then we branched from there. So that's the key. What else?
I see that our audience is shy tonight, so I'm going to take the last question.
Yeah, all right.
That's another good reason for living in Boston, where I moved a few years back, by the way.
Right.
Right?
That's right.
So my question is, as part of EO, right, I'm leading the largest AI artificial intelligence group out there. So we are 700 entrepreneurs around the My EO brand, talking all day about AI, building AI projects, launching AI companies.
Yeah.
You've talked about how AI is one of the roles could be become an assistant to entrepreneurs. You've talked about Jasper, which is producing AI-based content.
Yeah.
What would be your message for entrepreneurs that are starting up? How they should leverage AI to make their businesses grow faster?
Yeah. The short answer is Google, and I'll send you the link, a week ago, McKinsey put out a 15-page paper. So it beats reading an entire book that lays out the dozen or so use cases for AI in a very practical way in the very aspects of your business. There's your checklist. And that's what I always love to do. Find the smartest people and steal shamelessly from them. Now, the last thing I'll say is the problem with AI is it's neither artificial or intelligent. And that is where everybody got confused about it. Its job is very simple. What Steve Jobs said, to help you see around corners. Said another way, the late Dr. Deming said the only job of a leader is prediction. You just want to be slightly ahead of the customer, the market, and your competition. So your key question to ask is, where would helping us and our customers know something sooner than later would make or save millions or billions? That's the application of AI. That's the key question. And the key book is called Prediction Machines. The center of AI was not Silicon Valley, it was Toronto, Ontario. And their business school has 3 brilliant professors who wrote the book. They've got a new one that's just come out. But their book, Prediction Machines, will give you the clearest, and that McKinsey paper that just came out a week ago will give you the clearest roadmap for how you apply AI into your venture. So, all right, guys, thank you so much.